Questions for Corey Goode on Mars, Moon and Nazi Space Program, May 14, 2015 Q1. You have said that the Interplanetary Corporate Conglomerate, ICC, owns most of the Mars bases. How many Mars bases do they own, and who owns the other bases on Mars? The ICC has an entire industrial infrastructure that includes bases, stations, outposts, mining operations and facilities on Mars, various moons and spread throughout the main asteroid belt, where a super-Earth planet once existed. They have facilities to take raw materials and turn them into usable materials to produce both complex metals and composite materials that our material sciences have not dreamt of yet. They have separate groups of facilities that produce various types of technologies, as well as each facility or plant that produces a specific component of a technology, so that those working in the facilities and living in the support colonies, bases, do not know exactly what they are producing. Much of the time the components are multi-use and are used in crossover projects. There are facilities on Earth that operate in much the same manner that contribute to the SSP on several levels. There are other bases on Mars that are controlled by military, security groups, as well as some scientific outposts. These can be owned and maintained by other SSP programs, but are usually going to report to the ICC on some level, since the ICC controls much of the airspace and security operations on and around Mars. Most of the security personnel that are assigned to Mars are assigned to and serve under the ICC. The military groups that will be returning to their previous organizations, SSP groups, are kept isolated from the population and personnel who live and work on the colonies, bases and industrial facilities that they protect. They are normally in the rather Spartan outposts that I have described previously in other writings. I had seen a few of these outposts built from the ground up. They were always quite a distance from the main underground colonies, bases and industrial facilities, and spread out in a multi-tiered perimeter defensive type of system. There are non-humans also having bases on the planet. Some of them have been there for some time and have the highly coveted larger lava tube systems that have been built out into base systems that are unimaginably huge and can securely reside millions of inhabitants. Q2. Did you ever spend time on any of the Mars bases? If so, what did you say, and how long did you spend there? Yes, there were several occasions where there were specialty equipment malfunctions that needed to be repaired immediately. When the ICC was unable to arrange their personnel from Earth or other facilities in the Sol system to make a trip to a colony, base or industrial facility in the time needed, a request was put through to the specialists on our scientific research vessel. On these rare occasions we would fly down to the location, where we would be met by 4 to 6 armed guards. We would be instructed not to make eye contact or communicate with anyone for any reason unless it was directly related to the work we were there to do. In these situations there would normally be one of our security team, an intuitive empath, and a scientist and 2 technicians, along with tools and parts that may be needed. We would be escorted directly to the location of the work. The local facilities security team would watch us very closely and then escort us directly back to our shuttlecraft after the work had been completed and tested. We were never asked if we would like a tour, invited to spend the night, or stay and share a meal with the personnel or inhabitants of the facility. We did, however, get a chance to see some of the people. They were usually pale, unhealthy looking both physically and mentally, and seemed very much like slave labor. On more than one occasion we saw 4 identical people carrying crates and other items around that were obviously clones. I did notice in one colony that there was what looked like an art wall where people were hanging artwork that they had drawn and painted. This was the only time I saw anything that looked like it was meant to be positive for the mental health of the inhabitants. These were always places that we were relieved to leave. When we would visit the military outposts, they were regimented but had a completely different feel or energy about them. We were also more comfortable in some of those locations because we had actually seen and been a part of them being built at an earlier date. Q3. Were you ever briefed about and or experienced the atmosphere on Mars? Is it breathable for short periods, as some whistleblowers claim? Yes, I was suited up and observed some of the outposts being constructed in the northern hemisphere. There is a thin atmosphere, like being at very high altitudes on Earth. but the atmospheric pressure is very low, as is the temperature most of the time. There are times depending on Mars' season and weather that make it possible for very short exposure time on the surface. I would imagine that some have slightly acclimated to it. I would not want to spend any amount of time outside of the light-duty suits we wore, especially if you were doing anything physically exertive. There were some small wildlife and vegetation that we observed in the general location of where the construction was being done. The sky was a light blue to lavender and pinkish, especially during sunset when there wasn't a lot of dust in the upper atmosphere, which occurred frequently when we were on the surface. Q4. Does the Solar Warden space program operate at off-planet bases? If so, where are these located? Yes, there were some stations, located in certain areas of the solar system where vessels would dock for repairs, conferences and personnel transfers, etc. There were also other bases on some moons and even Venus, on the surface and in the upper atmosphere. There are also some bases in nearby star systems that I know next to nothing about, never had a need to know. Q5. In the 1963, the USAF announced the Manned Orbiting Laboratory, MOLS, where they secretly trained military astronauts to go into space to conduct space surveillance. The MOLS was publicly cancelled in 1969, apparently due to the development of unmanned satellites. Was the cancellation of MOLS genuine? Did the military astronauts go on to serve with Solar Warden or another space program? The Earth-based military Black Ops services have had separate and ongoing lower-level space programs from the beginning. They are very compartmentalized, and those who actually operate craft and stations in various orbital zones around Earth never have an opportunity to see what else is going on out there. NASA see their activities. These lower-level military Black Ops programs see the NASA, Advanced, Breakaway, Secret Space Program activities as well as some activities of off-world groups. They know there is a lot more going on beyond their programs but do not have a need to know and are debriefed routinely by the Earth military forces to get as much information as they can about what may be going on in the breakaway secret space programs that are more advanced. Very few below those in command of these Black Ops programs and the operators know of the other activities going on in the Sol system. The support and infrastructure portion of these Black Ops programs are not read into the small circle of information known by the operators and command structure and are kept oblivious of the other activities being observed outside the atmosphere of the Earth. That being said, there have been many other space stations and similar training labs that have been launched into orbit for periods of time, used in secret and then allowed to burn up in re-entry after they have served their purpose. I do not know if the particular orbital laboratory was ever an active program or not. The LOC, Lunar Operations Command, would keep up with the traffic of all space programs, civilian/military/intelligence satellites, NASA, secret military, other nations and of all of the advanced secret space programs, and their assets to try to plan and schedule their locations to prevent them from being visible to each other as much as possible. This includes keeping track of ground-based astronomical observatories and their highly documented and controlled access times and the windows of the sky they are scheduled to observe. This is why there are no real accidents when it comes to SSP vessels flying through the live video feeds of the NASA ISS. The traffic is very highly planned and tracked, and if a craft is caught on the live feed, it was done on purpose. Q6. In 1959, the U.S. Army proposed Project Horizon, which examined the possibility of establishing a moon base. Officially, Project Horizon didn't progress beyond the feasibility stage. Is this accurate, or did Project Horizon secretly proceed or was it combined with any other lunar base program? I do not know if this was one of the programs that was combined or cannibalized into the decades-long expansion of the Lunar Operations Center or not. There were several programs that were not only on the books but also already funded that were merged into both the advanced secret space programs, advanced, as well as into the military Black Ops space programs. Some people think it is ridiculous that there would be lower-level military Black Ops space programs, space plane, shuttle etc., as well as the continued development of an advanced aircraft based on 19th/20th century aeronautics principles. With all of the technology available in the breakaway civilizations, this is pretty ridiculous. When you think about the fact that most of the people in the aeronautic industries and military know nothing about the breakaway civilizations and their advancements, then you will understand why they are still spending trillions of dollars developing technology on a separate developmental track. They are developing technology to fight wars in the only way they know exists. Q7. You have said that the Nazis established a base on the moon, and this was later built over creating Lunar Operations Command. When did the Nazis establish their moon base? They had made several attempts at creating a moon base that did not go so well going back to the 1930s. They did find an ancient building that was obviously built by much larger beings that they could cement and repair enough to pressurize and use as a temporary base while they constructed the underground base that had a few visible structures on the surface, one of which did take the shape of a swastika. This base was still being built when they made the breakthrough deals with the Americans in the early 1950s that gave them access to the industrial might that had cost them the European War. They now used this industrial power, soon to be known as the military-industrial complex, to their favor and built out a massive base that went down many levels in a bell shape, and the surface structures built around the former structures to become what we now call the Lunar Operation Command, aka LOC. Q8. Which group of extraterrestrials helped the Nazis in their battle with Admiral Byrd in 1946–1947, and developing an off-world presence? There was help from the Draco Federation as well as a group that the Nazis were led to believe were ETs, referred to as Ariani or Aryans, sometimes called Nordics, but were actually an ancient Earth human breakaway civilization that had developed a space program, referred to as the Silver Fleet, and created vast bases below the Himalayan mountains, largest in Tibet and called the System Agartha, and a few other regions. The first craft they built used mercury turbines, and electrogravity engines were developed by the assistance of this group. Again, the Nazis, and to this day many Earth humans who are in contact with them and others believe them to be ETs, because of their deceptions, when they are actually very much Earth-based humans from ancient breakaway civilizations. I have heavily avoided speaking in depth about the few ancient breakaway Earth civilizations that have space programs and massive bases on the Earth, the Moon and elsewhere in the Sol system and other Sol systems. Some of them have been extremely deceptive and convinced some people that they are ET groups that are here to assist humanity. Some people have memorized some of these stories like some people memorize religious text. The Illuminati, Cabal has had a falling out with some of them and want them exposed for what they are. I think they should do the dirty work. I am not going to cause controversy that will just be a distraction from the main Blue Avian message of becoming loving, forgiving and focusing on expanding your consciousness and vibration. Q9. Do you know anything about Hans Kammler and the Kammler group that was in charge of the covert Nazi reverse engineering program, and its relocation to Antarctica, South America, Moon? Yes. There was much documentation about him and his teams being in both the three known Antarctic cities/bases, and several secret underground bases in Argentina. If he was stationed on the Moon, I didn't see anything about that. Q10. What role did Maria Orsic and the Vril Society play in the Nazi moon base? The Vril, Thulian Order of the Black Sun Orders were all involved in these programs. They had overlapping ideologies and agendas. Much of the Star Wars ideology of the Force and Dark Lord sides and their masters and the power of the dark side, dark energy and dark star energy was a mixture of science and religion to them. Many in the intel community became quite convinced that Maria Orsic was one of the blondes that would land in UFOs and talk to people in German pretending to be an ET from another star system. When some of the witnesses were shown her photo, they identified her as the same person that they had met from the flying saucer. She has obviously made it to the Antarctic bases, cities where she was taking part in a program using the Nazis' flying disc technologies to spread disinformation through some contactees. What part she may have played in the moon base I do not know. I do know that these societies were very much the backbone of what survived the war and who were in control of the facilities along with the group they believed was ET as well as the Draco Federation that they allied themselves with. Q11. Is it true that in addition to the Nazi SS flying saucer program run by Hans Kammler, that the Vril Society had their own, possibly more successful program due to ET assistance? The Vril, Thule, Black Sun societies. Kammler was Nazi SS and very active in the Black Sun and Thule societies, were involved in several parallel programs to develop advanced technology. They had channeled information that had sent them on a path to reverse engineer ancient documents from the East which led them to build very similar craft as one the ancient breakaway Earth human civilizations that convinced them that they were ETs from another star system. A couple of these ancient breakaway civilizations had done the same thing to the early secret space programs until it was discovered that they were not ETs at all but were actually humans of self-isolated genetic groups that belonged to extremely ancient civilizations that had existed on the face of the Earth. They sometimes looked slightly different from us but were very much our genetic forefathers. At the same time these societies had made contact with the Draco Federation and another group that avoided the Dracos. The German occultists were very busy from the early 1900s especially the time just before, during and after World War I. Their major breakthroughs occurred in the late 1930s and these secret societies had already began their own mini breakaway civilization that was kept from the German war machine and leadership. Q12. Did Orsic, Nazi organize an expedition to the Aldebaran star system? Yes, there was an early attempt at sending their early craft designs through natural portals before they fully understood portal physics. This expedition ended up being much like the Philadelphia experiment that the Americans would end up doing years later. There is a lot that goes into portal travel and an entire new physics and mathematics model was developed for calculating travel. Without the help of both off-world groups and the deceptive ancient breakaway civilizations masquerading as ETs they and the early joint programs, post-Eisenhower Treaty era, which became the various SSPs, would have had to have built these models from the ground up and learn many lessons the hard way. I have written the basics of traveling the cosmic web aka portal travel in an article in the link below. To understand the logistics of portal travel between astronomical bodies both inside a Sol system and between star systems this basic article should be consulted. At some point I will expand on this information and provide more details on the point-to-point traveling protocols discussed in the article. It wasn't that the Nazi base that became the Luck was abandoned. During the 1950s and after they had successfully infiltrated and subverted the military-industrial complex and major corporate heads they had effectively won control of the direction of not only the breakaway civilization programs but also the mainstream government and financial system. It was a very effective and silent coup that gutted what was once the American Republic and turned it into a corporate entity with each of us being assets with our very own serial numbers. This plan was in action far before World War I by various secret societies who controlled the financial system and as many know financed both sides of the wars. When both Truman and Eisenhower signed treaties with the Nazi breakaway civilization, societies it was then that the already well-placed Operation Paperclip operatives, in military, corporate industry, intelligence and established secret and public space programs, easily slid into more powerful and influential positions over the massive industrial complex of the USA that they coveted to expand their operations in space and form what would later become the ICC, as well as were involved in setting up all of the other space programs. So they did not lose the lunar base, they infiltrated the groups that put a massive effort into expanding it into the massive complex that it is now. Mechanics of portal travel through the cosmic web via torsion fields and scalar energy. Q14. Where exactly is the Lunar Operations Command on the Moon, how big is it, and do you know of any NASA pictures revealing its location? I cannot give any direct information about the location on the lunar surface of the Luck. Yes, there have been photos taken of it by NASA, military and a couple other countries. The photos have been airbrushed to remove all structures from the moon that NASA employees believe are ancient. There is a story about the ancient builders that makes its rounds, and there are items found below the ground in deep caverns in the earth that expeditions go after to locate that were engineered by the ancient builder race. People debate the hollow earth theory. It is not hollow, but it is a honeycomb, and some of the caverns are more massive than anyone can imagine. Q15. You say that the Nazis infiltrated the U.S. secret space program? Is that the Dark Fleet, Cabal and/or Solar Warden, or another SSP? Yes, I speak about it and some of the other questions here and in an article I wrote on my website. The Nazi breakaway, secret society groups and their LIDT/ancient breakaway civilization groups needed the massive industrial machine of the United States that had defeated the Axis powers in World War II. They had the science and technology covered, but if they wanted to meet their goals of moving out into the Sol system to colonize on a large scale and set up industrial facilities and infrastructure across the Sol system to mine materials and create what they have today, which has been largely achieved through the ICC group effort. When they had forced the hand of the United States to sign a treaty and create a joint secret space program, they had already positioned operatives throughout the military, intelligence, aerospace and corporate world. They already had the financial, banking world and various society hands for generations before World War I. These groups were all woven in and working together with other groups that are under the Illuminati, Cabal umbrella. The U.S. military had known about the Nazis landing in their exotic craft dressed up and approaching people in Europe presenting themselves as benevolent ETs from faraway star systems. We know where they learned that trick. That were here to assist humanity. After the treaty was signed and the joint secret space programs began in earnest, things quickly got out of hand and the Nazi breakaway group won the race to infiltrate and take over the other side. They soon controlled every aspect of the U.S. from the financial system, the military-industrial complex, and soon after all three branches of the government itself. This may be very difficult for some people to believe. However, the more people are waking up to what our own government has been up to the last 70 years, the more people are coming around to realizing what has happened to the U.S. Q16. Where do the Nazis fit in terms of the SSP alliance and the different ancient civilizations? Are they part of the Dark Fleet SSP? As explained, the Nazi remnants that were made up mostly of secret societies that created a breakaway civilization that kept the most advanced technology secret from even their highest military and political leaders, set up enclaves in South America and Antarctica. The locations in Antarctica were some ancient civilization ruins that had remained occupied by certain groups in thermal areas that cause areas similar to lava tubes and domes under the glaciers. There was an underground and under-glacier city complex that was already occupied and set up in a couple of locations, and the Nazis renovated an area that was mostly crushed above the surface but had plenty of room under the domed ice, thermal underground energy and caverns, accessible via U-boat under the ice flows and openings that made it ideal for a hidden multi-purpose base, that were perfect for them to secretly build out during the entire Second World War. They had been making contact with civilians from various countries for years, claiming to be aliens themselves for counterintelligence reasons. The U.S. had figured this out quite early, and after the failed Operation High Jump mission, the Operation Paperclip, scientists were asked to negotiate meetings. The Nazi breakaway group knew that the Americans had recovered crashed craft from several different species of off-world visitors that were so far advanced that they were getting nowhere with their reverse engineering of their technology. They had also received intelligence from their paperclip spies that the Americans had implemented an executive order making the existence of alien life the most classified subject on the planet. The reason being that the development and release of free energy would quickly destroy the oil trade, and soon thereafter the entire Babylonian money magic slave system that all elites use to control the masses. The Nazis used this to their advantage in some very public sorties over Washington, D.C. and highly secret atomic warfare bases, to mention a few. Eisenhower finally relented and signed a treaty with them, and a few other groups, both ET and ancient civilizations pretending to be ET. The Americans fully planned on infiltrating the Nazis and taking them over. As is not obvious, the opposite occurred. Nazi occult societies therefore infiltrated every single high-tech corporation and position of power inside the now joint breakaway civilization program. They have been involved in all Western space programs and projects ever since. It is true that the Dark Fleet personnel have been called stormtroopers and space Nazis both because of the way they act, dress, the symbols they wear as well as the shape of their vessels, Star Wars-like. They are very dark individuals who work alongside the Draco vessels mostly outside the Sol system, helping them in offensive activities against enemies off the Draco joint federation. Q17. The famous remote viewer Ingo Swann said that he saw naked-looking humans/ETs walking on the moon's surface. Is there a breathable atmosphere in some parts of the moon? There are many dozens of ET groups based in embassy zones in the moon. He could have been viewing any number of them. Their uniforms, suits may have given the appearance of them being naked. As a RV practitioner myself, I have an understanding of how some of the imagery language translates at times. There is an extremely thin atmosphere that is very near to the surface of the moon, down in craters, and away from the sun-facing side, so it is not constant as the Earth, Moon rotate around the Sun. It is not breathable at all and filled with a fine dust that would rip your lungs apart if you were unwise enough to try. The dust and ice crystals do make for some interesting light phenomena at times. Many people who do remote viewing or OBs have an experience of being brought to a place on the moon, a sort of gathering place before they travel further out into the Sol system and beyond. This is fairly common and I have experienced it myself. It is not in the physical realm, nor is it a physical place. Q18. In a famous radio intercept during the Apollo 11 mission, Neil Armstrong said that there were two large menacing-looking UFOs watching the astronauts. Was that a genuine incident? The moon is divided into embassy zones, much like maps of Antarctica, that belong to dozens of different off-world, and ancient breakaway human groups that do not get along. Many of the worst enemies are based only a few kilometers away from each other and have done so for thousands of years in peace. The moon is a diplomatic zone and conflict is not tolerated on or around it. Diplomatic territory is highly respected and not trespassed on by other groups. If the Apollo landings chose to land in some of these diplomatic zones, which is just about every square inch of the moon, they more than likely landed on territory of a group that did not appreciate it. They were most likely given a stern request to leave and not return to this location by whatever group they were trespassing on. Q19. Who are NASA and the Apollo astronauts from the moon? I do not know specifically which group gave a warning or what that warning specifically was. Q20. What can you tell us about the other shared human moon base used by the Dark Fleet? It is a heavily guarded and secret base that is at about the 10 o'clock position, on the backside of the moon. The portion that is visible is a trapezoid shape. It is only accessible to the Dark Fleet and some ICC personnel as well as the Draco Allied forces. Some amateur astronomers have caught video of swarms of craft leaving from this base location on a couple of locations. It is presumed to go far beneath the surface of the moon just as the Luck does. Q21. What do you know of other bases on the moon that are controlled, populated by non-human extraterrestrials? Other than what was explained above about the diplomatic zones and embassies, I do not have much more information. There are quite a lot of ancient ruins from previous disasters and wars that are left on the moon as a memorial both to the ancient builders and to the long-term peace that has been maintained on the moon. At times these ancient ruins are open to be visited but are mostly protected and off-limits. I do not fully understand why this is the case, but these ruins are spectacular and highly respected. Q22. Has the Sphere Alliance established a presence on the moon, or exerting influence over moon operations? No. The Sphere Alliance are 6th through 9th density beings that do not inhabit the spheres, use the spheres as vessels, require technology to travel or a base of operations. When they are not here interacting with us, they are either back at their home density or are around us in a phased-out, different frequency, state that makes them invisible to us. They observe and interact with us at will and then travel back to their home density by just a thought. Many of our density are having a very difficult time understanding the existence and abilities of a group from 6th through 9th density realities. We have no way to begin to fathom the way they perceive us or our behavior in our density. Everything is vibration. Energy, matter and even thought is all vibration. They can control matter and energy's vibrational state by their thought, consciousness and without the need of technology. Some of the beings that are extremely advanced and are 4th through 5th density beings still have some of the same limitations we do even though they are much more advanced. These beings are not used to dealing with other beings that are so much more advanced than they are. This outer barrier is something that has contained even them within our Sol system.